We've got Thulkenham, Jatrig, Kathleen. In the back is Westar, Oberon, Shiny Joe, Minnesunda, Eternal Seeker. And behind Kathleen is Philip GR. Behind Age Players list is Paige, Renia, Thulkenham, Rustic 20, Potru, Loritz, Exena, Layup, Dr. Chris Care AH, Scott Miller. Behind Axe is Zizzy, Jedi Leader, Terrafel, Caver, and Cave Woman. And we have Kiwi. Tonight's story is brought to you in part by MissLore.com for some of the history, DPWR.net for the Denis dates, UruArchives.com for the surface history corresponding to the Denis dates, and the Cavernian Calendar Converter, which was written by Brett Middleton of the Fuzzy Physics Institute for converting between Denis and surface time. Tonight's story is from Myst, the Book of Atris. For those of you listening at home, this story is presented a little differently than it was during the live performance. The performance on December 26th was a twofer. Two stories, numbers 60 and 61, were told together. Unfortunately, I did not realize that until after I had edited and uploaded the story with only one story number, 60, recorded. As a result, this story will have the twofer, stories number 61 and 62. Now, for tonight's presentation. As I have told these stories, we have learned about life in the cavern. We learned how the Denis came from their proud roots, seeking to shed their pride, yet pride crept back into their lives. We watched it cause the downfall of their great empire. We watched as a mother and her young son made their way to the surface from the ruins of Denis. A mother, Anna, grieving for the loss of her soulmate, and her son, Gen, angry at his mother for, he believed, leaving his father behind. We learned about Gen's adolescent life and his all-consuming anger towards his mother for what he perceived as her part in the fall of Denis and in his father's death. Basically, she was the root cause of his world having fallen apart. Instead of learning patience, he was impatient, choosing easy paths even though they may not be the correct ones. Where his paths would become blocked, he chose to use brute force to overcome his obstacles rather than use reason and logic. We learned of his son, Atris, and of Anna's second attempt to raise a good and decent child, teaching him to be observant of his surroundings, even of the bad things that occur as a result of his experiments. We learned how, when Atris was 14 years old, his father returned to the cleft to take him to Denis, where Gen intended to use Atris as an assistant, together writing ages to rebuild what Gen had perceived as the glory of Denis. We learned of Atris's first trek to Denis and the beginnings of his lessons from Gen on how ages are created. We saw the first of many confrontations between father and son, how Gen took Atris to show him some of his ages, and ending up at Gen's 37th age. We saw Atris learning the art, and of the relationship between the words written in an age's descriptive book and the end result, and of his first book, which he named Inception, in which he applied the rules of writing that he had learned, writing it from scratch, not copying phrases found in other descriptive books like his father was doing. We saw the beginnings of the son's abilities begin to outpace the father's. Last time, we saw how Gen decided to make a few changes to his 37th age, but not truly understanding the art made the age unstable. Then, Flying into a childish rage after Atreus accused him, rightfully so, of not understanding the whole, he desecrated Atreus's age and destroyed his own 37th age by burning it, beginning the rift that would forever separate father and son. This week, Atreus realizes the depth of his father's madness. Tonight's story opens in the Denis year of 9429, approximately 1773 AD, the year of the Boston Tea Party, which occurred on October 10th of that year. A truly busy year in Atreus's life. Atreus was horrified. With one selfish act, 2 descriptive books were destroyed. One was desecrated, and the other was burned. He was numb. 2 hours passed. Slowly, his mind returned to the present. He was sitting at his desk in his room. He looked down at his journal to read his last entry. My father is mad. His father was foolish, irresponsible, and vain, but certainly was no god. His father talked at great lengths about making Denis great again, but had forgotten what it was that had made Denis so great to begin with. It was their incredible restraint. Atreus had read of Denis' history. Their stories were replete with examples of their incredible restraint. For over 9,000 years they had suppressed the baser side of their nature, exhibiting patience and humility. That is, until Viovis, until the fall. Atreus weighed his options. Should he return to the cleft to Anna, or should he hide out in the city? Either way, he knew he had to say goodbye to Gen and tell him why he needed to leave. Any other course, and it would be him turning tail and running away. No, his father must be made to know why Atreus had to go, regardless of how angry Gen might become. It was decided. He would confront his father one last time. Steeling himself for the inevitable outburst of anger and mocking laugh that made him feel like a little boy again, he entered Gen's study. He noticed that his father was not at his desk. He searched for his book, Inception. A thought struck him. What if Gen burnt that as well as the 37th age? He moved to check the fire. As he did, he almost tripped over his father's body in the deep shadows, lying sprawled on the floor. At first, he thought his father might be dead or injured. Then he noticed a slight movement. Then the pipe beside his father's form. That pipe. It was perpetually clenched between his father's teeth. Obviously, it was some form of narcotic or drug. Whatever the contents, it had a rather foul odor. Then he noticed something else. Just beyond Gen's hand was the notebook that his father so jealously clung to at all times, the one he'd consulted on their journey down into Denis. Atreus's curiosity got the better of him. Atreus was confused. He opened up the small book and read at the top of the first page, the Book of Atreus. Surely that was wrong. He saw that the handwriting wasn't his own, nor that of his father's. Then it dawned on him. It wasn't Atreus, son of Gen. It was Atreus, father of Gen. He read on for a little bit, then stopped. The last thread connecting him to his father had been severed. He sat down and laughed bitterly. All this while he had admired his father for his courage in finding his way to Denis through the myriad of tunnels and in the dark. The book made it clear. It was his grandfather who had mapped out all the paths from Denis to the surface, not Gen from the surface to Denis. Atris closed the notebook and turned to stare at his father's shadowy form. "Why weren't you what I wanted you to be? Why did you have to be so small a man?" The weight of Atris's disillusion was almost physically painful. He knew he must get away from his father. He grabbed his grandfather's notebook and a lantern, then left. Some time later, Gen awoke and realized that Atris had left. Seeing that Atris had taken both his notebook and the boat that was moored at the dock, he knew that the boy was trying to get back to the surface, back to that woman. He went to his desk, pulled out a drawer, pulled out a lockbox from the drawer, and a page from the box. His servant Regis knew of a second boat on the island that had been hidden away. Using that, Gen and Regis set after Atris. Meanwhile, in the tunnels, Atris got to a point in his trek to the surface where the way was confusing. The end of the left-hand page did not seem to continue on the right-hand page. Then he noticed the rough edge of where a page should have been. It seemed his father's paranoia had finally served him well. He had about another 5 or 6 turns to make before making it to the safety of the next page. One wrong turn, and he could become lost in the tunnels. "So you thought you would make a journey, did you?" Atris froze at the sound of his father's voice. Looking up, he noticed that Gen had wrapped his boots with cloth, allowing him to approach silently. "I thought it time I kept my promise to my grandmother," Atris replied. "Your promise?" Gen laughed, but it lacked humor. "What of your promise to me? Besides, I think you have something that belongs to me, and I mean to have it back." "Then you'll have to take it from me." "I see." Then, at a gesture from Gen, Regis stepped from the shadows. Had it been just his father, he might have stood a chance and gotten the better of him. Against the strength of the mute, he stood no chance at all. Thinking quickly, he tossed the notebook up in the air and the lantern to the side, and ran. The cry of frustration from his father told him that Gen had not expected that. Atris thought he remembered the way ahead. If he could get to the narrow rope bridge ahead, he could disable or destroy it, and be away from his father for good. Finding the rope bridge turned out to be fairly easy. Unfortunately, Gen had out-anticipated him, and had already detached the rope bridge from its mounting pegs. The chasm was at the limit of Atris's ability to jump. Still, it was his best bet for escape. He jumped. He was able to catch the far peg, but his chest slammed against the chasm wall. He saw a brief shadow over him, then a vice-like grip around his wrist. Looking up, he saw that his father was pulling him up. "Ah, boy, did you really think you could out-jump me?" Gen and Regis took the lad back to their home on Kavir, and locked him in a strange room. After a long time, after his father had left, he assessed his new surroundings. Based on the type of stone used, it was probably the oldest part of the house. Noticing a small, spider-like rock cutter, he removed one of its blades. Knowing that he wouldn't be able to cut through the heavy steel door, he tried to cut away the stone doorposts. Unfortunately, all he did was create a small cave-in, completely blocking the doorway. He went back to the desk in the center of the room. On it were a lamp, a pen, a bottle of writer's ink, and the descriptive book of Gen's Fifth Age. Was this another trap? One thing he learned about his father: Gen never did anything without some self-serving reason behind it. Based on the words in the book, it seemed to be a peaceful place. But what is the catch? He queried to himself. He picked up the book and began to read over each word and phrase written in that descriptive book. Now, for our next story, Book of Atris, Part 10, we will see Atris's first journey to Riven. The story opens in the Denis year of 9429, approximately 1773 AD, the year of the Boston Tea Party, which occurred on October 10th of that year. It was a truly busy year in Atris's life. Gen had locked Atris in a rather cavernous room, lined with bulbous columns that stretched to the great arched ceiling. Atris stood there in shock. After quite a while his mind began to clear, to the point where he could take in his surroundings. The rock used in this room was a dull metallic gray, unlike that which was used elsewhere. He realized that this must be the oldest part of the house, built millennia ago. The Denis built for eternity, not realizing that their days were numbered. The floor was tiled in a mosaic, as it seemed most of their floors and pathways were. However, here the mosaic depicted King Ritneref, the greatest of all the grand masters of the Guild of Writers, and the first king of Denis. Remembering how his father had said the Denis loved secret passages, he searched all the walls, but to no avail. Atris recognized it for what it was: a prison. If you remember from our last story, he noticed a small, spider-like rock cutter and removed one of its blades. Knowing that he would not be able to cut through the heavy steel door, he tried to cut away the stone door posts. Unfortunately, all he did was create a small cave-in, completely blocking the doorway. He went back to the desk in the center of the room. On it were a lamp, a pen, a bottle of writer's ink, and the descriptive book of Gen's Fifth Age. Was this another trap? One thing he learned about his father: Gen never did anything without some self-serving reason behind it. He began to read its pages. If this was a prison book, he wanted to make sure what kind of age in which he would be spending the rest of his life. Based on the words in the book, it seemed to be a peaceful place. But what is the catch? He queried to himself. He read over each word and phrase written in that descriptive book. He studied the book for several hours, noting all the possible contradictions that resulted from Gen's style of writing. The entire work was short-sighted and disjointed, yet, surprisingly, quite clever. One feature stood out to Atris: the great tree. He was amazed at the economy of phrases used to describe it. He decided that being there would be better than spending the rest of his life in this dimly lit room. At least he would be able to feel the sun on his face again and hear the sweet songs of birds. He opened the book to its descriptive panel and linked. He arrived in a copse of trees. There was a small pool of blue water that had a convex shape to it. It was actually domed. How odd! Hearing voices, he hurried down a path toward the ocean. There he found a number of holes in the cliff face. He chose one above the high tide line and placed his linking book inside it. Backing out of the tight confines of the hole, he followed a path along the azure sea. It opened up into a meadow. He noticed how the shadow ended in a jagged line. Looking up, he saw it. The tree. It was immense. It was as tall as he imagined it would be, but the width! It not only made him feel small by comparison, but insignificant. It seemed to be as old as time itself. Realizing how exposed he was, he continued on, coming upon steps that were carved into rock. Following them up through the trees, he came upon a hut in a clearing. In his mind's eye he knew exactly where he was in this age, seeing his position as on a map from the descriptions in the Age 5 book. The hut looked just like the meeting hut, Gen's temple, on the 37th age. Inside, there was a freestanding screen of a man in silhouette, unmistakably his father. Atris wondered on how many other worlds were there huts like this one, where his father had set himself up to be worshipped as a god. Peering behind the screen, he saw a passage leading downward. Through a low-cut door was a long, narrow cave. He realized that this is where Gen's linking book was kept. About to explore the woods some more, he remembered from the descriptive book that this cave actually led somewhere. Continuing on, it led to a second, smaller cave. It was almost unbearably hot in this second cave from a volcanic vent in the floor. In the ceiling, in a circular hole roughly 8 feet in diameter, there was a pool of water. This had to be some sort of optical illusion, yet there it was. He noticed a ladder leading up to the pool. Curious, he climbed it. Kicking off the ladder, he started to rise in the water. He saw the shadow of a human figure on the surface of the water above him. He tried desperately to slow his ascent, but to no avail. In his struggle, he managed to swallow some of the water. It was like swallowing hot tar. As he approached the surface of this well, he lost consciousness. Slowly, arms out, he floated to the surface of the circular pool he saw when he had first arrived. Please join us next week when we will see Atris rescued and nursed back to health by Hrea and Karel, and their cousin. The end. And thank you all for coming tonight, and to those of you listening at home. And time to end the story right now.